there BookTube, it's Emma from Emma's Bookish Lifestyle, and today is my November wrap-up. Now, I know I don't usually do wrap-ups, but I've decided I'm going to try. I want to try and increase the content on my channel over the next year, and this is one of the things I really enjoy watching on other people's channels, and I thought I'd give it a go. So I have made some notes. I'm going to be brutally honest, so I possibly will be referring to them occasionally, so I'll apologise in advance. And some of these books or graphic novels that I've mentioned today, unfortunately I no longer have the copy of them. I either got them from the library or I've lent them to somebody, so I won't be able to show you the copies of them. I'm not quite technically proficient enough to put the image up here. I'd really appreciate it actually if Mel from Mel's Bookland Adventures is watching this episode, if she could send me the details of how to do that. I would really appreciate it. If you could vox me the details of how I do it on YouTube, I'd really like that. I'm trying to make these videos a little bit more smoother, a little bit more all-rounded than I have previously. Now, one of the other things that one of the other viewers has asked me is to introduce my dogs. So this is Conan. Conan's got the blue collar. Yes, he's named after Conan the Barbarian, and no, not the Arnie one. I'm afraid I am a massive fan of Jason Momoa, who I think is currently starring as Aquaman in the Justice League films. But I really loved his interpretation of Conan the Barbarian, and this one is often the most vocal that you will hear in the background of my videos. He doesn't like noisy people. He's very protective, and he's also a very gentle and kind-hearted little chihuahua. So that's Conan. Looks like Drogo doesn't want to have a cuddle, so maybe not. Maybe I'll try and show you Conan by the end of the video. We'll see how we go. He's just recently had a bit of an operation, so he's a little bit sensitive. Maybe I'll do that another day. Or maybe he'll just appear in the background. If you see a chihuahua in a yellow collar, that is Drogo, and yes, also named after a character by Jason Momoa, which is Khal Drogo from Game of Thrones. So yeah, so those are my two dogs. As I say, I'll try and show you Drogo maybe on another day when he's not being pestered by his brother and he's more inclined to be on the screen. So let's get started. I've noticed we're 3 minutes in, I haven't even got going with my wrap up. So the first book I read in... behind me. The first book I read in November was Autumn by Ali Smith, and boy oh boy does this book pack a punch. I have to say, I have never ever read any Ali Smith, and I read the synopsis on the back of this after seeing it all over BookTube and thought, you know, it's autumn, I've got to be reading this book, and before it kind of gets too out of date and out of place with the current situation and the current political climate, because I understood when I picked this up that obviously it had a political element to it. But what I really loved about the whole thing was not only the obviously the poetic writing and the fact that it was elegantly written, but also had anger in there, but also at the same time was a little bit sort of cosy and comforting, was the fact that I loved the characters of Daniel and Elizabeth and their interaction from a very young age, and it just was like a melodic piece of music. It sort of flowed and was just an absolute delight to read, and didn't take me long to read at all, although maybe my Goodreads date is a bit out of wonk because I may have forgotten to do it at the time. But for a book that's under 300 pages, I highly recommend this Ali Smith's Autumn. I have, since reading this, gone and bought winter, which will be coming up shortly, but probably not until my January TBR, to be brutally honest, because I've got a very large December TBR video to follow. So the next book I read, or actually it was 2 graphic novels, so I read Witches by Snyder, and then I read Low Volume 3, which is a Rick Remender graphic novel. Now, Witches Volume 1 is something I can go into a bit more detail, obviously, but I won't with Volume 3 of Low, because obviously there may be people out... Sorry, because obviously... I don't know where that phrase is coming from and why it's come out of my mouth twice in a row, but there you go. Low Volume 3 may be something that you haven't read Volume 1 and 2, so don't want to give any plot away on that volume. Needless to say, I actually really enjoyed it. I think it picked up a lot better than Volume 2. It was one of those, started high, kind of dipped a little bit, and has gone back up again. So with Witches, Volume 1 by Snyder, what I loved about it was, and I did read it around Halloween, was how frightening it was. If you're not into horror, it's not for you. It's not just, it's not gratuitously violent in its graphic nature because it's cartoonised. It does take some of the brutality away, but it is brutal from the very, very beginning. And basically it's based around a young girl and her mum and dad, and something happens in the town where they used to live. I believe her father may well be an alcoholic of some long standing. Her mother had an accident and unfortunately miscarried a sibling, and this little girl was subject to what we believe was a bullying that went wrong, and we don't really know completely what happened. We just know that it was severe enough that the parents felt it was in her best nature to move away. So they move away and they move into an old house on the outskirts of a wood in a local town. And that's where the plot continues. I don't want to give too much away in case it's something that you're really interested in. It was dark, it was twisted. There is, I believe, plenty more to come. I don't think Volume 1 barely scraped the surface. But it gave us a small insight and a bit of a taster, and it definitely gripped me enough that I will be getting Volume 2. The next book that I read was The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, and I have to say, I DNF'd it. Yep, again, I thought I'd read it over the kind of Halloween-y period, moving into November, and I just got stuck. I think I did get to page 98, and I've still got the bookmark in there, which is handy to know because I need to take the bookmark out. And I just felt like all the answers had already been given away. I couldn't see any twist. I couldn't see anything moving forward that would continue to entice me to read on. Now, I know Simon at Savage Reads loves Wilkie Collins, and I have got another Wilkie Collins book, The Haunted Hotel, which I'm hoping I'll get on with a bit better. But this is a chunkster. I mean, this is 500 plus pages. No, it's 498. So it's 498 pages, and I'm 100 pages in, and, you know, I'm just not compelled to read on. If any of you have read it and you think it's worth me re-picking this up before I forget too much more, please let me know in the comments down below, because initially I was really enjoying it and I liked the style of writing and I liked the kind of dark Victorian nature of it, but I'm just concerned that we may have stumbled upon the answers already within 100 pages and there's not really going to be much more insight further on. So please, if you've read this, let me know your thoughts and whether I should reconsider picking this back up. Next, I read a book that is a long-loved book for me. Now, this is a new edition because my other one was 30 odd years old and dog-eared beyond all recognition, and it was a paperback and it had fallen apart. So that is A Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. Now, I know many of you may have read this at school or may have just read this out of interest. Anne went into hiding with her family into an annex above a factory warehouse in Amsterdam in 1942, and unfortunately before the war ended she was exposed, and she actually ended up dying in March of 1945, just before the end of the war, which is absolutely heartbreaking. Now, this book I read when I was about 13, so I have been pretty much reading it every year, every other year for the last 30 years. Part of the reason why I read this is as a means of reminding myself of where we've come from, what atrocities happened, and to remind me to remain humble and wherever possible do what I can to help my fellow humans in this situation. Now, obviously we've got Syria going on at the moment. We've got an awful large number of bombings all over the place in many countries, including Manchester and London this year, and you know, it's just heart-wrenching, absolutely heart-wrenching. And this book reminds me of how far we can plummet as humanity. This is how far we can go. That a 15-year-old little girl who writes with such succinct clarity can see what we are doing to each other and hope that we can't go back to that at the end of a war, only to find that 30 years on there is still the possibility, and there is still a high probability, that in some areas there are mass genocide based on faith, based on difference between human beings. Nobody seems to remember that we are all human in here. We all have human souls, we are all human beings. We are not identical. None of us are identical. And if it took anyone in their right mind to choose a small criteria, it could be us next. So I read this every year to be completely humbled, and this has this year floored me even more than normal, maybe because of everything that's going on, and it reminds me of how bad things are getting in the world over the last couple of years, definitely last year and this year. It's really hit home how bad things are. And with the new Trump administration, I'm just absolutely floored by his ability to be kowtowed to by the neo-Nazi parties in the US, and the fact that he even got into government, to be brutally honest. But that is only my own personal opinion, and I fully respect anybody else's opinion, but that's just my personal opinion. And the other thing that I really picked up this time was the naivety of a young girl and the longing of a young girl for love, for attention from her parents, her ability or inability to be able to live in the circumstances she was forced to live in for 3 years. So if you haven't read it and you are interested in true World War II facts from the perspective of a 15-year-old Jewish girl who never asked for anything but to be loved and be part of her family and friends, then that's the book for you. And as I say, I've read it numerous times now. And the last book is The Tiger and the Acrobat. Now, this is a book by Susanna Tamaro, Tamaro, and I'm going to have to open the inside cover because one of the translators' names is quite difficult to pronounce. So one of the translators is Wilkie, who is now based, I believe, in Milan, and the other lady, I believe it's a lady, is Nicolagina Presavento. I love that name, Nicolagina Presavento, also Italian, who has translated this for Susanna. Now, this is quite a philosophical book. It's in the first person of the tiger, so the tiger's voice is the main storyteller and narrator. She starts off as Little Tiger, the tiger cub, and we follow her through her transition in life and through her journey. And during that sort of striving for independence, this beautiful Amur tiger or Siberian tiger comes across humanity in both its positive and its negative forms. And during its positive forms, it comes up with so many beautiful philosophical topics about life and death, hope, fear, and many, many other topics. And for such a slight book of only 160 pages, this was just absolutely amazing. And I am so, so glad I picked this up from the Wellcome Library in London when I did my booktuber tour. So, highly, highly recommend it. It's only a 4.5 stars on my Goodreads, not that they do half stars, but 4.5 stars on my Goodreads, because I don't believe it needed to be and the Acrobat. I think it could have just got away with being called The Tiger. My reasoning for that is that the Acrobat featured so fleetingly in this book. In fact, there is another character that is in here much longer and has a much stronger and more poignant story to tell with this book. And so I felt actually a little bit abashed that it wasn't that person, that character, who was mentioned, and it was the Acrobat instead. If anything, I would have liked it to maybe be called The Tiger and the Shaman, but highly recommend it, well worth a read. So that leaves me now, oops, that just fell off the table. That leaves me now just with what I'm currently reading at the moment. And I am currently reading or listening to an audiobook, again for non-fiction November. And this is Going to Hurt, The Secret Diaries of a Junior Doctor by Adam Kay. Now, he is quite dry, quite brutally honest, quite graphically funny at times, and also goes into a lot of medical terminology, but what I like is he actually explains that medical terminology to you. He works in the gynecology department, and this is about his progression from an SHO up to, I think he's currently a registrar. I don't know if he reaches consultant, I'm yet to see, but I'm 67% of the way in. And I'm really enjoying the narration because the author narrates. And I do feel that you do get an additional benefit from the author narrating. There is one other book that I did listen to in non-fiction November, which was my non-fiction book, to go alongside the one that I've just mentioned. And that was another audio book, and that was why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. And that was also read by the author. And I have to say, it was a thought-provoking book, very, very thought-provoking audiobook. It had me at times despairing, had me at times questioning how much I'm really impacting life and the world, and whether really there's anything other than my positivity and my actions that can help improve the situation of tolerance and love and acceptance of different races. And I fully understood where the author was coming from, but also at times I felt she was quite brutal and unfair isn't the word, I would just say she was quite brutal in her truth, or in her telling of her contact with the research of the book and the life of the book and the reason why she entitled it what she did. However, she was very succinct, she was very honest, and I thoroughly respect somebody who can be that honest. It made me question, as I say, my behaviour and my personality and my approach to dealing with people of colour or other nationalities, not just people of colour, different skin colours, but obviously different nationalities and religions and faiths and beliefs. And I'm really sorry, Conan is wowling away. There's no one out there. He's just making a noise for the sake of making a noise. But it was extremely good. Now, I've noticed that we're at 20 minutes, so I'm not going to go any further for now, but I will be posting later on a TBR for my December reading, and I look forward to seeing you then. Take care for now, BookTube. Enjoy Vlogmas. Bye.